Segment we're calling Monday Morning Quarterbacks. Washington Examiner contributor Stephen Kent and founding partner of Northern Star Strategies, Michael Starr Hopkins. Good morning to both of you. It doesn't sound like the two of you are all that far away from the concept of changing the way we police in the future. The question is just, how do we do it? Michael, I'll start with you.
Look, I think it's going to be difficult, but I think we've got to look at programs like 1033, a program which takes military materials and then gives it to local municipalities. I think that I have a theory. When you dress people up like G.I. Joes, they start to act like it. And so I think we've got to be more thoughtful with how we go about policing communities.
And Stephen, to you, what works best?
Yeah, well, my instinct is not to support ideas like hashtag defund the police. It strikes me as silly messaging pushed by more fringe elements and activists who don't have an interest in the political ramifications of those kinds of messages, particularly for Democrats. There are really substantive reforms being pushed by less radical elements that do reject entirely the principle of getting away from the police as an institution. You can end qualified immunity, which protects officers from having to pay damages in lawsuits. You can end police unions, which are really egregious, just as something that actually exists and is not in support of the rights of the people. And you can end the 1033 military surplus program that Michael mentioned.
All right, Stephen, let me stay with you for 1 second, and then we'll get back to Michael for a response. If you just got rid of the verbiage here, the defund the police, the hashtag, if you didn't have that tagline for it, and you just went by the concept of change, would it be easier, in your opinion, for people to agree on what changes might need to happen down the road?
I think it might be, but I do want to say, to the credit of activists, that this is how you push major change and how you push a major reform in the conversation. Defund the police, in most cases, does not mean getting rid of police departments and having a zero budget. It means we need to readjust our priorities and get our city budgets back in line with the support of education, the support of social services. It doesn't have to be an absolute thing.
Michael, back to you now, and kind of along those same lines. It does, I think, for some get a little confusing when you hear defund the police. It makes it sound like you want to go to absolute zero and start over from scratch again. What is your take on where changes could come? And do you agree with anything that we just heard from Stephen?
Well, I absolutely agree with Stephen in the fact that we need to take a holistic approach and we need to end things like qualified immunity. But Democrats have been notoriously bad on messaging things like this and allowing Republicans or allowing outside parties to make defund the police the slogan, I think, is a mistake, because it oversimplifies what I think is a very complicated issue. I was a public defender in Manhattan, and I had a front seat view to what police are doing in terms of having to be therapists, social workers, law enforcement. I mean, the counterterrorism, the things that our police are covering, I think, are too big of a pot for them. And so I think what we need to be doing now is separating a lot of these things and giving more funding to mental health and more funding to emergency management training, rather than having all of that fall into the police.
So then let me stay with you for a second here then, Michael. If you do that, then obviously money that just doesn't appear. You got to take money, you got to move money from somewhere. And if you're moving the money back into education or you're moving it into social services and you're taking from a police department, what do you take away? Absolutely. Well, I mean, when you look at budgets are kind of a fungible thing. And so when you start to shift money away from law enforcement and put it into pots like education, into things like healthcare, what you do is have a progressive solution, one in which, rather than spending money on locking people up, you're spending money on training people, on educating people, on giving people preventative care. Things that we've seen over time have a much stronger effect. All right, Stephen, I'll give you the final word, same topic.
Yeah, I mean, just let me paint a non-dramatic picture for you. The default position of our political class is to say, when a pandemic hits, right, just a couple of weeks ago, you cut social services, you cut education, you reduce trash pickup for your cities to save money. And then they went in my city of Manassas, right outside of D.C., and increased the amount of police on the streets to enforce social distancing laws and maintain order. And when you get desperate and someone goes and throws their trash bags out on the street because they haven't gotten any pickup for a week, the city says their priority is catching you doing that, ticketing you, maybe fining you, and putting something on your criminal record. This is not the society that I think we want to have. We prioritize punishment over enrichment habitually.